Thank you everyone for coming to this Conservative Environment Network panel, Lagging Behind, about insulation. So we're the Conservative Environment Network. We're the independent forum for conservatives who support net zero, nature restoration and resource security. We have 21 panel events 21 events, including receptions as well, to get nice and boozy, over 3 days at this year's conference, and we encourage people to look at our website. So that's www.send.uk.com/conference, or you can just pick up a leaflet off one of the Send teams. I'd like to start with thanking our sponsor, the EEIG, for sponsoring this event and making it possible. We're going to have a few opening remarks from each of our speakers. I'll introduce them as we go into them, and then we're going to be coming to you guys for questions, so get thinking on that. And if you want to tweet about the event, then do tag us at @sen_HQ. So to briefly introduce the topic, I'm just going to chuck some stats. So we just had the Treasury announce that they're going to spend about 150 billion, might be coming down now, to pay everyone's bills if it goes over 2,500 or thereabouts. But we've also got 19 million homes that are energy inefficient. So that means about 20% of their heat, or up to 20% of their heat, could be escaping straight through the windows, straight through the roof or the walls, etc. EEIG, in your recent report, you said that a difference between an EPCD house and an EPCC house, so those are the two groups of housing where most houses are, could be £420 more per year in bills. In terms of the environment, residential heat is about 30% of energy use and about 20% of our emissions. But there's also the problem that insulation can cost thousands or tens of thousands of pounds, and we just haven't been insulating our homes, hence why 90 million of them are energy inefficient. We were meant to have Lord Callanan, the Bays Minister, with us today, but he is stuck on a train. So he might be able to make it by the end, give a quick speech, might not, but we've got lovely Minister Ed Birkett from Onward instead, so we'll be coming to him. So thank you very much, Ed, for coming and filling the gap. I'm going to start first with Simon Fell, who's the MP for Barrow-in-Furness, where your family has apparently lived there since the 1600s, which is quite impressive.
Read my website, thank you.
And before Simon was MP, he worked to protect people from financial crime and scams. So Simon, I'd like you to first give your impression on what your constituents think about energy efficiency and how important it is for them, and maybe go into that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for attending. I saw the queue snaking over there. I think they're heading in the wrong direction. It should all be about insulation. So I represent Barrow-in-Furness, which, if you haven't been to, firstly, you're missing a trick. But I think it's probably worth explaining the sort of area it is. So I've got a mixed constituency. Barrow itself is a working-class town. Considerable amount of terraced housing. The local authorities hung on to a good deal of that for housing stock. 3/5 of my constituency is essentially Lake District and Lake District National Park. So I see two very different challenges when it comes to insulating homes and incentivising homeowners and those who own and the local authority who holds those properties to invest in them. The biggest challenge we have is that we don't have practitioners in our local area. So as many grant schemes as the government may want to throw at the problem, the nearest practitioners we've got are sort of based out Preston way, hour and a half-ish of travel. They are obviously massively oversubscribed where they are. So realistically, we're reaching down to here to try and find people who can come and install cavity wall installation, solar, whatever it may be. They have no incentive to do so. They certainly have no incentive to quote. So as motivated as a good number of my constituents are to get involved in this agenda, and they really do see the merits in it, let me tell you, they're simply unable to do so. There's a few other challenges there which I think we need to be quite creative about, or acknowledge some of the difficulties of, and just say we're not going to fix the problem in some parts of the world. So, for instance, if you go out to my more Lake District parts of the constituency, so chocolate box villages, as you might imagine them, you have homes there which have been in place for 300 years, 500 years, massive thick walls, limestone rendered. You know, there is no amount of insulation you can put on there which is standard that isn't just going to cause those walls to fall apart and rot. they are not fixable in the conventional sense, and yet we're wrapping restrictions around social landlords to get to a decent energy performance rating, which means that actually they're going to go out of business, or they're just going to convert to Airbnb properties. You know, there are knock-on effects to some of these policies we have, which we haven't really thought through, and we need to be a lot more intelligent about that. But I think there are easy wins here. You know, as I mentioned, you know, Barrow Council has a huge amount of council stock. It is badly insulated. It is badly looked after. These are easy wins. We can get there quite quickly, but we need to be training up people to be able to actually deliver some of these projects. And I think the other thing we need to, you know, we can't just look at this in isolation. We need to be looking at energy waste and energy generation more widely. You know, it absolutely befuddles me that we don't have a requirement on every single new build property to have solar panels on its roof. Don't hit me. Solar panels on its roof and all those sorts of things. Yeah, if we put those requirements in, we will be building up a skills base to deliver this stuff now, which would be transferable to some of these other energy saving requirements we need to be getting to hit the targets that we've just heard about. I think that will probably do for now.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Simon. I'm going to come next to Andy Mayer, who is the Chief Operating Officer, Company Secretary and Energy Analyst at the Institute for Economic Affairs. And you were previously Head of Public Affairs for the world's largest chemical company and Green Energy Advisor to the UK's largest company. That's right. So I was wondering, as the representative from the Institute for Economic Affairs, which I hear is now running the government, what do you think we should be doing as a free marketeer to get these 90 million homes more energy efficient?
So just to reassure people in the room, at the moment it is definitely the case that SEN is far more influential over the government's net zero and environmental policies than anybody at the Institute of Economic Affairs, myself at the bottom of that list, having been the person who had to go out and say, this government energy price guarantee, probably not a great idea. It's going to be a lot of unfunded borrowing, and you may cause some problems with the markets. That's not a popular view with ministers at the moment, but it is a very consistent free market one. So, energy efficiency. Just to be clear, the company that I worked for previously was BASF, who's one of the major providers of insulation materials in the UK. And we used to run a demonstration site down in Nottingham at the BRE and produce lots of good stuff that was then feeding into the market. And we had somebody sitting there who was working with BRE and then advising the government on regulation. And from a free market perspective, that's possibly part of the problem. That if you get too heavily interventionist in this area, you end up in a situation where you're essentially letting a small number of companies dictate what standards should be to the advantage of their own products rather than creating markets. Now, from a market perspective, energy efficiency is a no-brainer, or rather it's a very simple calculation. Does the cost of what you're trying to install over the longer term actually save money? And if we're looking at the environmental perspective on that, then what is the carbon price at which some of those calculations make sense? So for most installation with a uninsulated home, you rapidly improve the U value of the house up to about 100 millimetres. Beyond that, it's a bit more of a diminishing return, so the case is less good, and I believe the figure at the moment is about only 3% of the UK is uninsulated, and nearly most of it has more than 100 millimetres. So the picture is not quite as bad, I think, as the figures were painted earlier, but it's still important. Cavity wall insulation, bit hit and miss. Solid wall installation, really interesting, but a very niche product. And we saw the disaster of pushing that out far too fast in the last decade, leading to unfortunate decisions that had tragic consequences in some social housing projects. So there is a case against over-regulating and being overly directive, and in fact being better at directing people towards these choices in a way that they can then afford. On the interventions, I was asked to look at the history of energy efficiency interventions and which had gone right and wrong, and this is a vast topic. So for opening remarks, I think that's probably a bad idea. But just to say, when this started with the Energy Efficiency Performance of Standards, the National Audit Office did a review. and concluded that for the £260 million spend, there was about an additional £250 million of benefit to those people enjoying the scheme. So in that particular regard, you can make an economic case that it was money well spent. But as an economist, I would say, is that going to be true forever? If you keep expanding the scheme, diminishing returns set in. And the question now is, do these schemes make sense?
Thank you very much. I thought I'd come next to Sarah Kostense-Winterton, who's co-founder and chair of the Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group, EEIG, and executive director of MEMA, the UK's largest insulation trade body. She also has strong personal and professional interest and expertise in environmentalism and over 25 experience in UK and EU public affairs. One of the phrases that I quite like to describe insulation is that it makes people warmer and richer. And I was wondering, from an industry body point of view, what do you think the government should be doing next, keeping in mind the failed schemes of the past, to get more homes insulated?
Rightio. First of all, I don't get invited to dinner parties anymore because I just talk about insulation non-stop. Every conversation, my friends just say, stop there. It's an all-consuming subject, but a very positive one. I want to thank Sen for obviously this event firstly. I have obviously a personal supporter of Sen and also work with you professionally, but your work is invaluable in this area. So I want to thank you for that, and hopefully Sen gains even more traction and influence within government because you've got the great ideas. Many years ago, when I started in this sector, I bumped into Boris Johnson, probably not the name I should be mentioning right now, and I had a chat with him about insulation. He said, "There's nothing I love better than a bit of lagging," in true Boris Johnson style. But he was right. We don't love it enough. And we see now a government that's focusing on supply side rather than demand reduction. We need to use less energy because that's the cheapest energy, is the energy we don't use. We need to focus on that. And I wouldn't say we have failed so far, but we have not grasped, government has not grasped the opportunity to insulate. This is a very natural area to grasp. We have over 130 billion, even more actually now, of basically emergency measures for energy. And if we'd actually grasped this a year, 2 years, 10 years ago, we wouldn't be where we are today. Basically, cost of living crisis. If you insulate your home and any other energy efficiency measures, you can save about £500 to £900 on your bills. That would be music to anybody's ears right now. But also, this isn't about just subsidy, and I really want to sort of stress this. Subsidy, grants, help needs to be directed to those who need it the most. And it's not everybody. But we must unleash the potential of the private investment, the lenders who want to lend in this area, low interest loans through retail banks and the UK's infrastructure bank. But also look at other areas like energy saving stamp duty. It's always been the sort of, or we don't touch stamp duty, but obviously in the mini budget, stamp duty has been touched. We've got this new flexible approach. Can we look at obviously helping people shift their behaviours and actually making their homes energy efficiency for the longer term through an energy saving stamp duty, something that can be revenue neutral and can shift away from the subsidy culture. Also, policy so far within government has been very much boom and bust. Green Homes Grant is a classic example. I don't want to linger on something that's felt quite negatively within industry, but £2 billion being pushed out to industry in 6 months that doesn't actually have the capability or the capacity to respond, with many businesses actually not responding but walking away. And those businesses that do engage with it have ended up making 1,000 people redundant. Short-termism does not create a sustainable mass market for consumers as well as businesses. So we also need to work out how the policies fit together like a jigsaw, because that's how they must be. For instance, also pushing out heat pumps. If we're not doing fabric first, if we're not insulating our homes first, then the heat pumps will make people's bills go up. It is fact. They will use more electricity. We have 29 million homes out there that actually need, who we call it the able to pay, but the homeowners out there who actually need this help. So this is not all about subsidy. We have subsidy and we want to start phasing that out. We don't want it there forever, but we really need to place the emphasis, the security and savings for British businesses and British insulation businesses to deliver.
Thank you very much, that's brilliant. Come now finally to Ed Birkett, who is head of the Getting to Zero programme at Onward. And you were previously at Policy Exchange doing energy and environment there. Before that, I believe you were working in the solar industry, so you know your stuff when it comes to energy supply and demand. So if you could please give your thoughts on recent policy announcements.
Thanks, Jack, and thanks, Sen, for having me last minute with the minister stuck on the train. So I apologise if my presence is a disappointment. I think I would start by saying that the UK government's record on energy saving is pretty bad. Since 2013, which I guess has been entirely under the Conservative government, so the record is not particularly good. Boris Johnson said, I think in the run-up to COP, that the UK is not lagging on lagging, but unfortunately that's exactly what we're doing. In 2017, we insulated 95% fewer walls and lofts than we did in 2012, and that's an absolutely staggering figure. And as Andy says, it doesn't necessarily make sense to insulate every property to some ridiculous level, and things can go wrong if you sort of do too much insulation without thinking about ventilation and things like that. But in the current context, actually, a lot of that spending on energy efficiency would have paid off pretty quickly, given that energy prices are 3 or 4 times higher than they are in a normal year. So when you're doing that cost-benefit analysis, you'd also have to think about that sort of random payoff or once in 25-year payoff where you get very high prices, and that actually could make the business case for something like energy efficiency look a lot better. So we've had a belated recognition that we need to insulate more. Both of the leadership candidates talked about it during the leadership campaign. And perhaps that's become even more urgent now that the government is paying a proportion of our energy bills. And I think actually that does resolve one of the fundamental issues in the energy efficiency market, which is that the government is paying, the Treasury is paying through for these schemes, but actually the benefits are accruing to private households. So perhaps that's why the Treasury and the leadership candidates were a bit more interested in energy efficiency now. But I do think a note of caution, we need to be realistic about the timescales. So we've seen the failures of the Green Deal. We've seen the failures of of some elements of the Green Homes Grant. The social housing bit works a lot better, and the local authority-led bit works a lot better. But it's that boom and bust approach to energy efficiency is not working. And so we do need sustained effort over spending reviews, subsequent spending reviews. It does need to be a steady as she goes approach. So I do worry a little bit around do we get a bit overexcited about trying to rush around and build up this industry in the next 2 years. So that's why I think we need a split approach between the short-term approach and the medium-term approach. In the short term, Onwards looked at this, and one of our recommendations in our recent report on the energy crisis, we said 3 things that can be done in the short term to reduce demand. A national energy saving campaign for households and small businesses. It's an absolute no-brainer. And I know the government doesn't want to intervene in people's lives like they had to do during COVID. But trust me, the public will not forgive them if there are blackouts this winter and they do not feel that we've been doing our bit. I'd also say that we will be relying on the EU to send us energy at some point this winter. And if they think we're being profligate, then I think they'd be well within their rights to be more sceptical about sending that energy our way. Secondly, a new basic energy efficiency obligation on landlords and housing associations. So not some of the onerous stuff that Simon was talking about around insulation and EPC values, but more very basic things like LED lighting, working thermostats, working timers on heating systems. That's the sort of thing that can make a difference this winter and have a very short payback. And then finally, some mandatory measures for businesses. Patio heaters. We're in October. It was 19 degrees yesterday. Patio heaters blaring all around London. And actually, if the government really does think there's a risk of blackouts, then it's a no-brainer to try try and get those turned off. I'm aware I'm probably going over time, but in the medium term, I think we should really be pointing out that a unit of energy saved is just as good as an extra unit of energy generated. And that's where I think some of the fracking debate has got a bit out of hand. I'm very open to doing some trial fracking wells. It's a source of energy potentially that could be useful, but it is just as useful to save a unit of energy as it is to generate an extra unit of energy. And it's not entirely clear whether the government agrees with that at the moment, or whether they see all energy saving as a form of penury and poverty. But I think that would be the wrong view if that's the view that they take. You look at LED lights, the same product, very short payback, and 80 to 90% less energy used. So my message would be to the government, we do need to get on with it, but we do need different approaches for the short term and the medium term. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So we'll come to the audience with some questions. Hopefully you've got some already in just a moment. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions of my own just to get the discussion flowing. I wanted to come to you first, Simon. Just to be clear, when you're sort of doing your MP inbox at the moment, I imagine you're getting a lot of emails in general. But do you have constituents coming to you either through your inbox or on the street sort of asking for help in getting their bills down, and are they interested in insulation, things like heat pumps? Is there a demand for it which you feel like government policy isn't quite meeting yet?
So the answer is yes. Obviously everything's going swimmingly and my inbox is full of people just telling me what a wonderful job we're doing at the moment. But we get a lot of that. A lot of it flows from the failure of the various grant schemes that have followed in the past, where they've tried to engage with them, haven't managed to. So you've got this problem where you've raised expectations and not been able to meet them. You also have a good range of diverse cases. So beyond the sort of insulation debate, where I've got farms in the Ickle Valley who are doing their best to get themselves off the grid, but the cost of connecting to the grid and selling energy back is just so prohibitively expensive that they simply can't do it, despite their great efforts. It feels like there's an awful lot we can unlock here, and without taking us too far down the track of local energy bills and that sort of thing. That's really, I think, an open door for the government to be pushing on, and we're not. But certainly, as I mentioned before, my constituents aren't stupid. They can see that they can save money here. They can reduce their bills. They could potentially even make money if they're enabled to do so, and that's where they want to be.
Brilliant, thank you. And another question for Andy. So would you or the IEA be more comfortable, rather than the sort of the grants-based schemes or like subsidies that energy efficiency schemes have usually relied on in the past, would you be more comfortable with tax breaks and tax incentives for people to insulate their homes? And also, one of the big problems that we always find with insulation is if it costs like, I don't know, 10 grand to upgrade your home, then a lot of people can't do it all in one go. Do you think there's a space for the Treasury to maybe have put in financing mechanisms to help people spread those costs?
Okay, so two interesting questions. I mean, in the free market movement, there are purists who want simple low taxes and get excited, for example, if there's a VAT discount. I think the zero rate's a bit of a problem. And then there are those that are sort of the more neoliberal pragmatic end who think, well, okay, we've got social policy goals, what's the most efficient way of reaching them? So one of my pre-IEA thoughts is very similar to your own, which was if we have capital gains tax on second homes, and against capital gains tax you can claim various things, and we have already established standards by which we say these things are, broadly speaking, energy efficient and good for the planet and good for all these different other things, then why can't we change the tax system on homes, making a transition, just to be clear that you wouldn't want to penalise sellers and buyers unfairly as you went over, by putting a low level of capital gains tax on homes and allowing people to offset things like heat pumps, things like insulation schemes against that, such that there is a very clear benefit to the homeowner in a way that it just isn't with stamp duty, because stamp duty is obviously on the buyer. So that, I agree, would be a potential way of doing it, although it will not please my very purist friends. On financing, the Green Deal does, the old Green Deal rather, does stand out as the exemplar of how not to create a policy for the best of intentions. I mean, it was a complex financial instrument that nobody wanted at a price nobody could afford, placed in a way that could not be sold to people, and it eventually collapsed under its own absurdity. So on that basis, no. But in the basis that we are now looking at a world where the Overton window in energy once again has moved to the left. The government has introduced possibly the largest one-off socialist measure in peacetime in the price cap. Now, what that means is that if I'm a Labour MP or a Extinction Rebellion activist, I'm looking at that and saying, well, given you're prepared to spend £150 billion on fossil fuel subsidies just to keep prices down, what then becomes a more affordable alternative? And clearly, a large funded energy efficiency scheme would be better than doing that for part of it. So that's the world we're now going into, and that will be one of the basis for the energy policy debate at the next election. So I think by default, you're going to get an answer to that question.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions yet? Okay, I don't know. Okay, we've got the mic there. Should we start with that gentleman, and we'll do these three gentlemen in the front.
Yes, good afternoon. One thing you've mentioned, or have not mentioned, is MVHR systems, which is essentially a heat pump that is taking heat out of waste air and pumping cold air in, warming it up by scrubbing it against air you're pumping out. Those heat exchangers have an efficiency of around 80%. It makes a big difference to reducing the rest of the services you need to heat a house. But no one's mentioning this at all.
I think I'll go to Ed for that one. He's poked me.
So I'm actually looking at putting, so this is mechanical ventilation heat recovery. So this is essentially a ventilation system. So many of you, I guess, in your homes will have extraction fans in your kitchens. Some of you have extraction fans in your bathrooms as well that just basically suck air straight out of the house. And then in order to keep the pressure regulated, some other cold air is coming in somewhere through your windows or any gaps. So essentially you're just pumping out hot air and pulling in cold air. What you can do with these MVHR systems is you can have a system where you pump air out from your bathrooms and your kitchen, and then you get air that comes in through a different vent, and you pass the air across each other, and that heats up the air that's coming in. So it means you have lower heat loss. And actually, these MVHR systems these ventilation systems are very important if you're going to high standards of insulation. I've experienced this in my own flat where it's pretty unbearable a lot of the time, just because it gets too hot in there. The insulation is ridiculous. When you cut into one of the walls, the insulation sort of pours out of its own volition. So we do absolutely need to look at ventilation. I think it's a broader point, though, about standards. So as you know, I'm in a fortunate position where I bought a flat, so I'm looking to upgrade it. And actually, as someone who works in the energy industry, I still don't have very much confidence that if I get something done, it will work. I have no way of checking that it's going to work. I don't have much confidence in things like the MCS accreditation scheme for various types of installers. So I think there's a broader point there around building standards, and it goes the whole way through from actual building regs, the building regs inspectors, things like that, all the way through to accreditation schemes. And although it's sort of not exactly a very free market approach to have more of this regulation, I think the fact that we have such variation between installers is actually hindering the market and stopping people spending money that they would spend if they knew or had a higher confidence that they were going to get a good outcome.
Brilliant, thank you. Should we do two in one go, if you'd like to pass the mic after?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to ask a question about loft insulation, really, because we see so many different types of loft insulation, encapsulated loft insulation, ordinary loft insulation, and then sheep's wool came on the scene and was meant to be, home-produced, farmers were throwing it away, etc. And I don't seem to see it now in the marketplace so much. So what type of insulation should we use, and why aren't we using sort of homegrown sheep's wool insulation like it was being promoted for a while, because farmers were literally throwing the wool away?
And I think just in front of you, yeah.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Henry Chan. I work for Friends of the Earth. I have an air source heat pump and a number of additional grey hairs thanks to the Green Homes Grant scheme. So I have a sort of perspective as a consumer. One of the things that we've been thinking about is about the consent of homeowners to have all this stuff done to their houses at the great disruption. I mean, we talk obviously insulation, but if we're talking about cutting emissions, we also need to look at low carbon heating, at potentially solar, as you're talking about. And I'm quite interested in what the panel thinks about, is the best approach to tackle a house or a street and try and do all of these things, do it in one hit, or is it to spread things over time? And also kind of what responsibility, do we mandate it has to be fabric first, for example, because I know we had to replace our boiler, so it made sense to get a heat pump. If we'd not done so and insulated, we'd just be locked in with a new boiler that would last 15 years, for instance. So, yeah, that's a lot. So.
Brilliant, thank you. Sarah, would you mind answering the loft insulation one?
Yeah. Yes, well, I represent the mineral wool industry, and it is also a home-spun product, perhaps not from sheep, but from recycled glass and stone wool. So it is a homegrown business in itself. Sorry, excuse me. That was really bad timing. So yes, you need to obviously, whenever you do anything, you just don't go out and buy a product. You need to ensure that you have that advice. So, there are retrofit coordinators. There are, obviously, your builder will have a good idea. It's not just, you just don't go to B&Q and think, oh, right, I'm just going to go and do something random and stick a bit of insulation in my loft. It's all about to make sure that you get, obviously, a quality installation. And I would recommend actually getting somebody in because, for a few £100, actually, over the winter, topping up your loft, which is actually... everybody sort of sits there and go, well, it's all done. Well, actually, it can be better and it can be thicker, and you can go to under the instruction of your builders to actually buy it from B&Q. So it's actually what is right for your building. And I'm not going to say any product except obviously mineral wool performs well. I'm doing a renovation project at the moment, and my walls, loft, everything are full of mineral wool insulation. In fact, it's a building next to my home, so we're actually going to, over winter, probably actually just lock up our house and go and live in the outbuilding. So it'll be literally nearly zero carbon, so to save on our bills. So that's my advice. Please get advice before you do anything.
Brilliant, thank you. And Simon, I wanted to come to you. There was a point in that second question about should we just do it street by street, kind of big retrofit programs, and there's been a few successes, especially local authorities. So the Green Homes Grant, the one bit that survived of that because it did well was the local authority delivery scheme. Andy Streets, who's mayor for the city that we're in, he's been doing some great neighbourhood retrofit programs. Do you think that might be a better way forward? And do you also think that we should be mandating how exactly people upgrade their homes?
I think it depends on the homes. Certainly, so Barrow Council in my constituency, they have been going street by street. It is a very, very slow process for all the reasons I mentioned before, namely trying to find people who are qualified to do this stuff. But we've got to remember, especially when this is social housing, these are people least able to pay the bills that they're facing right now. So, there's a social prerogative to get this done. In terms of what the right blend is, in terms of which measures you put in now, which you move to later on, I'm a big fan of just trying to finish a block of homes and get them done to a really high standard. That is actually to give them credit. What my council's doing, they're doing a really good job on it. But it is incredibly slow work, and but it does reap benefits. And when you've got row after row of terraced housing, you can imagine the impact that would have. And if I can just pick up the gentleman's question there, I can introduce you to a lovely shepherdess called Sarah who will sell you some wool insulation if you're struggling to find some.
Right, fantastic. And Ed, you caught my eye. I know Onward do a lot of work on this sort of thing.
Yeah, so I think on street by street installation, I think it kind of depends what you mean. So if we're talking like street by street for social housing and or sort of block by block, then yes, absolutely, because you've got sort of one owner, as it were, or as in the housing association. I think we might, so in terms of street by street for private rented and owner occupied, I think we might get there in the long term. That's the direction that Labour wants to go in, certainly. But as I said earlier, I think we need to get the standards in place so that people can be sure. Like if someone came to me and said, I've been recommended by the council to come and install something in your house, I'd run an absolute mile, because there's no track record, or there's, at least I'm not aware of that much track record where that's been done successfully. So actually, I do think some of the targeting social landlords and private landlords, which is a third of the market to start with, is the right way to go. If Conservatives can't get a market-based approach working for the owner-occupier section, 2/3 of the market, then actually the Labour proposal for local authority-led street-by-street retrofit starts to look more attractive, because we've messed up the alternative.
Yeah, so basically the street-by-street approach can work. Obviously, it's economies of scale that really are helpful here. But there are some fantastic studies. I don't usually sort of specifically focus on my members, but Rock will have some great case studies. They did a social housing project in Portsmouth, and it's actually how you engage the residents, and it is a long process. And the one thing I really want to stress here, this isn't just doing something quickly. This is a long process, because it's important to get it right. Basically, the industry have obviously had their fingers burnt quite substantially over the years, and quality is integral to everything we do now. I have been involved in the standards process for many years, since even, leading on from Grenfell, a standard called PAS 2035. I won't go into it because it's incredibly complex and sends anybody to sleep at the end of the day. But it's all about delivering quality, and that's why it is helpful to do it by street, but it's not always appropriate as well. So it has to be by, case by case.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just a brief point on this. I mean, the free market position on this obviously would be one of utter neutrality as to whether it was better individually or street by street or in other ways. I mean, one thing that strikes me from the track record of the grant-based elements of support is the mistake that was made right from the start was to focus on the energy companies, retail energy companies in particular. These are fundamentally different businesses to those that are actually delivering the goods, those that are installing them. Now, if we are in the territory of saying there is a certain amount of money we want to put towards this every year, at the moment it's £1 billion a year for eco, then would it be better to have that competitively available to people who can prove that they know what they're doing and get results through tender or whatever scheme, such that where people have got that track record of success, whether a local authority, a private business or a third sector organisation, and then expand the market that way, because that would be a genuinely fusion approach.
Brilliant, thank you. And then the microphone's at the back, so I think we'll start at the back and then we'll bring our way forwards.
Yes, good afternoon. My name's Nigel Granger. I'm a small retailer in Warwickshire. I've got on my desk at the moment a quotation for replacing all our fluorescent lights and putting in a solar panel on the roof of the business. And that's around £50,000 that I'd have to commit to get that installed. I mean, it's quite a large retail premise, I might add. But
Well, you're being ripped off.
well, I've actually got two quotes, but I mean, 50,000 is the figure. Warwickshire doesn't come into the grant assistance loan area that the government is running for commercial properties at the moment, and I believe it's about 40% a grant. The banks aren't interested in giving me a loan to reduce my energy bills because they say I'm going to benefit from it in the end. Having had COVID, we're still not making a profit that we can offset that cost against our profits. So we're in a bit of a catch-22 situation. I want to improve the environment, want to reduce our energy costs, but the initial cost is just prohibitive to do it. Can you think of any way that we can get all retailers and commercial businesses to put some form of energy saving onto their roofs? I mean, the supermarkets, car parks, the roofs they've got in the supermarkets, they should all be covered in some form of energy collection. And I'd like my roof to be collected energy as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I think there was one more hand just in front of you. Shall we take another question? Yeah, the gentleman there. If you want to put your hand up for the microphone.
Thank you. Firstly, I wondered if it would be possible that triple glazing could be VAT-free. So when people do make the change, they're going to buy the cheaper products, which will be triple glazing. And the second thing is the panel aware that a British company has patented the idea of a microwave-powered boiler? Because not many people are, and they could well be the solution, because apparently, based on a recent study, hydrogen is no solution. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got solar, and then triple glazing, and then microwave boilers. I don't know. Ed, have you heard of microwave boilers?
Yeah, as someone who did an engineering degree, I'll maybe take that one. So my understanding of a microwave boiler is that it's pretty similar to a normal immersion heater. So I am slightly sceptical. I'm sceptical that the efficiency could be any greater than 1, which is effectively the efficiency of an immersion boiler. So in the absence of someone providing some better evidence, I would say it doesn't feel like a panacea there. So but yes, I agree with you. I mean, the hydrogen boiler stuff just really doesn't feel like a particularly good use of hydrogen, certainly not for a very long time, particularly when heat pump systems, and they are a system, when designed effectively and operated effectively, can be a cost-effective solution.
Brilliant, thank you. And Andy, I might come to you on how do we get businesses to whack a load of solar onto their roof? Do we just take a chainsaw to business rates?
Well, again, I'm going to go back to an old BASF campaign, or rather one that was led by Vauxhall, which was that you simply remove plant and machinery from business rates. It's absolutely absurd that we tax people for improving their properties. Now, if we want to put a green slant on that, that would very much fit with the narrative of the government, but it shouldn't be there.
Okay. And fat-free triple glazing. Any ideas? Any comments? No, fair, okay. Sounds good though. Yeah. Another few questions. So we go to the front because there's 2 here, so that'll be nice and easy for you, Lindsay.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Juliette Phillips from E3G, which is an independent climate and energy think tank. Skills and supply chains is something which has been mentioned by Simon and others, and it's clearly a big kind of missing part of the puzzle at the moment. And I was interested to hear what panellists think is needed to supercharge this investment from both industry and government. Thanks.
David Adams from the Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group. I'm really interested to hear that there seems to be agreement across the panel that this is a long-term thing that we need to address, and boom-bust isn't very helpful. I'm interested in observing that certainly at the moment the market doesn't seem to value low-energy homes. It's perhaps starting to, and if we have sustained very high energy bills, which obviously have connotations and difficulties associated, then the market, I would assume, would react to this. Also observe that when we talk about tax breaks and things, vast majority of owner-occupier homes actually don't even have any mortgage. Clearly some are mortgaged, but that is a minority. Are we agreed that there needs therefore to be some structural long-term driver in this space to enable the market to really start to value this, for businesses to start to see the benefits of investing in this space and training, etc.? And if so, is the question what might work best rather than it not being required?
Thank you very much. Simon, I might come to you for skills, if that's okay.
That's very generous of you, thank you. I think your colleague answered your question when he mentioned boom and bust. This is what's driving or not driving the aggregation of these skills in the longer term. So if I look at my constituency, I'm going to steer us completely away from energy for a second. So we build the UK's nuclear deterrent. We're the only place that builds submarines in the UK. In the 90s, we stopped building submarines, and we went from a workforce of, I'm looking at a submariner over there, a workforce of tens of thousands down to about 3,000 pretty much overnight. Since we restarted that programme, we've gone up to 17,000, and we now have less people going to university than almost any other part of the UK because they're going into apprenticeships, they're building skills because they can see a career there, they can see the path and they can see the pipeline. We simply don't have that in my neck of the woods in this sector, and that is the problem. Until we give people a consistent footing and let them know that either the support's going to be there through grants or make it very evident to people the benefits of going down this route and insulating your own home and then saving on your energy bills, we're not going to build that up and we're not going to start to accrue those skills. So that's where we need to be. So certainty in the marketplace, and I have skills academies that will happily start training people, and I have constituents that will happily take those trained people into their homes and have them insulating. Just got to square that circle and fix that bit.
Fantastic. Also, I've just noticed the Minister has just arrived. The train's managed to get him here. Thank you very much for coming. Just before, I think I might come to you for some, just in a second to give your remarks, and then we'll just get that last question answered first. So, in terms of long-term drivers, I might come. Did you want to come on skills?
I just want to talk about the supply chain actually, because I mean the supply chain is absolutely key to all of this. A specific example, before Boris Johnson resigned, there was a potential policy in the offing, and basically we were involved at the very end of those discussions, and we manufacture products. And we were asked, do you have capacity? And you go, capacity for what? You know, how much, when, how long is this going to, continue for? If we have that certainty and capacity can be built, you can't build factories in 6 months. My members are building factories now, moving actually, production over from the EU. They have capacity, and these things take a minimum of 18 months to come through, but they're taking a leap of faith. So it's really important to have that long-term vision. I'm not going to go on about the money because we always do, but we have to have that vision for the businesses to scale up. Then the rest of the supply chain gets in order. We see this in other areas, including PPE, obviously a contentious issue in itself, but you have to have a resilient supply chain to deliver, and we can do that in the UK.
And Andy.
Just very briefly, it's not an area I thought put a great deal of thought into, but it does make me think back to the Negawatts report from Politics Exchange back in the day, and whether that fused with a contract for difference would enable you to create some kind of long-term vehicle, but that would need a lot of thought. On the skills agenda, don't create a complicated, expensive system around an apprenticeship levy, which has created an enormous bureaucracy and cut the number of apprenticeships and training places. Do something simpler. If we want to skill people up fast and let them discount the cost of training against employers' national insurance, you could do it for the same sort of cost, far more people, far faster. You would obviously trade that off for the standards in it, but if what we need is speed, then that's how you do it.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Minister, would you be ready now, or to give some thoughts? So I'll just introduce you very quickly. So this is Lord Callanan, who's Bayes Minister. He joined the House of Lords in 2014 after spending 15 years in the European Parliament. He was chairman of the European Conservatives and Reformist groups in Brussels from 2011 until 2014, and he's had various roles in the government in the UK Parliament, which includes the Minister of State for exiting the EU, Under Secretary of State for Transport, and of course his current role Under Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Corporate Responsibility. So yeah, if you could please give us some thoughts on lagging behind.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And first of all, my profuse apologies for being late. I would tell you the story of my journey from London, but it would take the remainder of the time to occupy the various trains I've been on and stations that I've been on since then. So my apologies. I'll keep it very brief to give people a chance to continue with their questions. So whatever the hype is going on in the background at the moment, net zero is still a legal obligation and probably unlikely to change. And if it remains a legal obligation, then the problem is that we need to decarbonise all heating in the UK. And as 80% of our heating, for various historical reasons, is gas, we have to eliminate all effectively gas central heating from homes and commercial buildings. And just to think about I think it's 30 million buildings that we have in the UK, it just gives you an idea of the massive task that we have. I'm an unashamed champion for better insulation for home retrofits, mainly because that's the ministerial post I've had for the last 3 years, driving the government's agenda on that. And the good news is that we are making progress. In 2010, something like 14% of UK homes were EPC C or above, and now it's 46% of homes are C or above. Now, EPCs are not a perfect measure. Before anybody wants to ask questions about it, I'm aware of the criticisms of them, but it is a good rough measure. So what are the government doing? Again, whole range of different policies. If anything, I think the landscape is perhaps too complicated in terms of government policies, and one of the tasks that I've got that I'm sort of working on at the moment is to try and simplify the whole thing. I forever fielding queries from MPs about the various different schemes we have: Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, Home Upgrade Grant, Local Authority Delivery, Eco, Boiler Upgrade Scheme, etc., etc. And it occurred to me a year or so ago that if even MPs don't know what the various government schemes are and how they're all working, what chance have members of the public? So we're rolling out a new website on the basis that most members of the public who want to access the various schemes don't really care what acronym it comes under. They just want to know if they're eligible or not. So we're rolling out a new website. We've taken the Simple Energy Action website and migrated it onto gov.uk. It's kind of a home upgrade MOT service, as my officials describe it. It's still not complete. We still need to do further work on it, but it's actually now up and running. It's linked to the EPC database, so you can. It would give you a tailored recommendations for your own property, and you put in the various details. And in the next couple of months, we're hoping to further link it to the various schemes, the acronyms in which I mentioned. They amount to something like 6.6 billion over this spending review period. We're in constant negotiations with the Treasury. My previous colleague, Kwasi, is now the Chancellor, so we're hoping we'll be able to persuade him to part with more money for schemes to come. Although one sort of little mentioned aspect of his budget, or mini-budget, last week, which was buried in the footnotes, is that we have managed to secure an extra £1 billion for what's called Eco Plus. For those who are specialists in this, we know that the eco system is an obligation that's placed on energy suppliers to retrofit properties. It was surcharged on bills, but has now been transferred as part of the energy bill support package onto general taxation. We had, I think, since the Green Homes Grant ended, a bit of a gap in the market for the so-called able to pay. All the rest of the schemes that I mentioned, apart from the boiler upgrade scheme, are all targeted at those on benefits, those on lower income, those with properties off the gas grid, etc. And the new Eco Plus scheme, which we still need to legislate for, to put an additional obligation on the suppliers, but they're very keen to have it because they're going to get the money to do it directly from the Exchequer. That will start to roll out from about April next year. 500 million will to boost the existing eco obligations on low-income households, and the rest will go to the able-to-pay sector. But the details for that we will be rolling out soon. I just caught the end of your discussion there, which I thought was interesting, because I think you were getting to the nub of the problem. And one of the issues that we've been dealing with for a number of the last months, as we've looked at how we can do more in this space, is actually, believe it or not so much a lack of money or investment to go into the sector. It is the ability of the supply chain to actually cope with increased obligations. And we had early on in the summer extensive discussions with all of the energy suppliers. Basically, what could you do in terms of increased measures if the money was available? And the surprising result was, from talking to all of their retrofit installers, is relatively small amounts, and that pretty much matches up with the money we've managed to secure from the Treasury to do that. So one of the things that we do need to do is to do more work on expanding the supply chain. Skills is a key part of that, and we are working very closely with the DFE to ramp up skills in this sector. It's going to be an enormous area in the future, tremendous opportunities for businesses and customers. We're very keen not to get into the difficulties that we've had in some previous schemes, about which I still get lots of angry letters of somewhat shoddy workmanship that has happened. And people are writing in now to their MPs and others who pass it on to me. And they had, I don't know, cavity wall insulation or whatever done 10 years ago. It's now gone wrong. There's now damp problems. And of course, the supplier is nowhere to be found. And they've gone bust years ago or disappeared. And so the customers have no action that they can potentially take under the scheme. So now all of the works that we pay for, fund in government and through the various schemes are all approved by an organisation called Trustmark, which provides an insurance-backed warranty. I know that produces some frustrations in the supply chain. Sometimes a lot of small builders and others think, well, why can't we do this work? But I'm keen to streamline the process as much as possible, but I also want to make sure that the quality mark is built into it. The customer guarantees are still there if various companies are not around in 10 years to honour the terms of their warranty and their obligation. There's a lot more I could obviously say on this, but I realise I'm taking up your time and we haven't got a lot of time left, so happy to shut up then and answer any questions that anybody has got. So thank you very much indeed.
Brilliant, thank you. I might just kick off with a question myself. So we've been, just before you arrived, we were talking about how this government hasn't really been speaking about demand that much, given that the price of gas being so high, etc., etc. Maybe you have to look at the demand side as well as trying to boost the supply side as much as possible. But as you just said, in the recent mini budget, there was tucked away a substantial amount of money for councils, but also for Eco Plus for insulation, and also the heat pump grants stayed. So do you think, I know it's a new team, but do you think the new team at Bays are going to keep in the same direction on the heat transition, as well as are they enthusiastic about reducing the demand for heat through cutting waste, essentially?
Well, as the only remaining member of the old team in Bays that's kept the same responsibilities, I'm the only person I've really had much discussion with so far is the Secretary of State, Jacob, and he's totally committed to the agenda, and he was very keen to talk to me about how we could take it forward and how we could expand on this if at all possible. And we'll be hopefully rolling out more policies in this area soon. The boiler upgrade scheme that you mentioned is an interesting one. It's now up and running. It's quite successful. I had an update with Ofgem last week. I forget the exact numbers. I think it's about 3,000, roughly, vouchers that we've issued so far, which are grants of either 5,000 for air source heat pump, 6,000 for ground source heat pump, and of course the previous Chancellor removed VAT on heat pumps as well, provided they're installed as part of an approved installation, which all helps. But of course the fundamental problem, and heat pumps are, and I'm a bit of an evangelist for them, are a great technology, and they are much, much more efficient than gas boilers in terms of converting a unit of energy into heat. The problem is that traditionally in the UK, and you wouldn't believe it at the moment, but gas has been traditionally cheap compared to electricity, and so it didn't make a lot of sense to take a gas boiler out and install a heat pump because you were paying that much more for the units of electricity. Removal of green levies and putting it onto general taxation will help. And we do have a long-term policy aspiration to try and balance out the prices more so that electricity is cheaper compared to units of gas, although you will understand that is quite difficult and tricky politically to do at the moment. So it's more of a longer-term policy aspiration. But the schemes are going well, and we are rolling them out. With regard to demand-side management generally, I think you're on to a good point there. One of the other things that I have responsibility for is the smart meter rollout. And I think I've seen actually a bit of a shift in opinion on that. A lot of people were very sceptical about smart meters. We've now about roughly 50% of homes and meters in the country are now smart meters, continuing to install at the rate of thousands a week, but again, gigantic task to install all of about 50 million meters in the country as smart meters. The programme has already paid for itself in terms of the payback period. But the great thing about smart meters is that they do allow a lot more demand-side management. If you, famous example, if you've got your electric car, you can charge it at 3 o'clock in the morning with an advantageous tariff. And if you don't use it the next day, again, provided you agree and you want to do this, you can feed your electricity back into the grid again when it's more expensive, if you wish. And a number of the suppliers are starting to look at very innovative tariffs like this as we move in terms of generation from a sort of point node generating system of large power stations, which we've had previously, over to a much more dispersed system of intermittent power generation, where sometimes we've got loads of very cheap power and sometimes we might not have so much and it'd be more expensive. So there is a lot more we can do in demand-side management and a lot more we need to do in terms of grid reform.
Well, thank you. Is there any questions from the audience? Yeah, just go into the front. Oh, and then, yeah, no, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. That's really interesting and clearly welcome the announcement for the extra 1 billion. I think probably everyone in the room had read that little footnote. Although I remain a little concerned with all of these, what happens when it comes to an end. 3 years is great. That's much better than got to be spent by March 31st. Yeah, but I've worked in 20 years in the industry, and the real challenge is when the grant's first introduced, there's a boom, and when there's it stops, where do things go? And the industry has kind of learnt from that to be cautious because they can't see long-term futures. And I'm assuming that there isn't an intention to bake grants into the forever, because obviously that's a way around it. I wonder, Minister, what's the appetite for structural drivers to encourage sustained long-term demand, indeed create or incentivise real market demand, and your views on ideas such as the energy-saving stamp duty incentive, nudging stamp duty up and down, or minimum energy efficiency standards, or any other in this space?
Okay, a whole series of questions there. First of all, I entirely accept your point about what happens when grant systems come to an end. And I think that's actually one of the issues and problems that we've got with the supply chain. I think that's well recognised by certainly by myself and all of the officials that work on that, on these schemes. You know, we've had a whole series of peaks and troughs over the years. The most famous of which was the ill-fated Green Homes grant. In retrospect, it was completely unrealistic to think we could spend, £1.5 billion over less than a year, which was the original Treasury demand, and clearly we couldn't and didn't. But one of the points that we're trying to put in with all of the current grant schemes is to make them over multi-year schemes. Now, obviously, I'm constrained massively on that by the way government finance works, and trying to commit the Treasury to finance any longer than 2 or 3 years is a next to impossible task. We've actually getting 3 years for the latest eco is it might be a huge result because we need to do that. We need to provide long-term certainty. Again, if you've been following closely, you've seen that last week we launched the latest round of SHDF and HUG funding, 1.6 billion of direct government support. The SHDF money in particular is matched by housing associations and local authorities. So, we're getting over 2 billion of direct support into this sector. And again, we're trying to make longer delivery periods. This one goes over a couple of years. And the constant demand from the sector is always give us a longer delivery window because we can plan better. But we have been trying to signal that this is coming, and I've done many meetings with local authorities, housing associations and others to say, we're opening this bidding round in October, get your bids ready, because this is the largest slug of cash that we've had. And previous grant schemes, when I first took on the job, it was halfway through the original Green Homes grant. We opened the local authority delivery side of it, which was another 500 million part of it. And we didn't get enough bids from local authorities for all of the money that we had available. We had to go out again to try and get bids from local authorities to do the work. And I'm not criticising them for that. It was the end of the pandemic. They didn't have the resource to put into it. Some of the suppliers were overloaded. And it all goes back to the resource issues and the supply chain issues that I mentioned. Part of the solution to that is to give more long-term signals, to provide long-term funding. And I can assure you, in every discussion we have with the Treasury, we always make this point. You know, if they have 800 million available, it's best to give 200 million a year over 4 years rather than just an 800 million slug, because it's just proved impossible to spend it in the supply chain in the brief period. I won't comment about stamp duty changes and I understand very much the point that you're making. It is a matter for the Chancellor. You know, we put forward proposals on what we think would stimulate the market. That is one of them. And there are some various quite innovative taxation changes which I think could help a lot. But I will leave it to Chancellor to decide how good they are or not. Minimum energy efficiency standards. Obviously we had the PRS consultation out, which we're looking at the response at the moment. For those who don't know, this is a possible increase in the standards of the private rented sector. At the moment, you have to have EPC of E or better to rent a property, and there was a proposal in the summer to increase it to C. Genuinely mixed opinions on that, both within government and among stakeholders. Of course, it's always good to drive up demand in the quality in the private sector, but there are a lot of concerns that all you will do is just drive landlords out of the sector, particularly in areas of the country like where I come from in the northeast of England. If you have a maximum spend of, say, £10,000 on a £500,000 flat in London, it's okay. If it's on a £60,000 flat in Tyneside, then it's quite a significant expenditure for the rental income that you will get. So we're trying to counterbalance the risks of driving more landlords out of the sector, reducing the supply of rented accommodation, which I absolutely do not want to do, about the need to try and bring up standards in the longer term. So we're still very much genuinely under consideration on that at the moment. And regulations in the owner-occupied sector are probably a bit politically too toxic at the moment with the current energy prices. So I suspect we won't be doing much in that for a good couple of years yet.
Thank you very much. Where we're running over time, I've been lagging behind myself. But thank you very much for coming, especially thank you to the Minister for making it out of chamber, and Minister Birkett for filling the slot as well. Simon, Sarah and Andy, thank you. You've all been brilliant. And